So welcome to our Everything Marketplaces workshop today, which is going to be on Marketplace SEO. So if this is your first workshop, welcome. And our community workshops are live member events where domain experts walk us through topics that are relevant to us all as marketplace founders and teams here. So they're 20 to 25-minute presentations followed by a group Q&A. So with that said, I'm really excited to welcome on Mike Heijden today. He's a top mind when it comes to SEO for marketplaces and has worked with marketplaces like Fresha, Luxury Escapes, Flippa, AutoGuru, Bookwell, TruckIt, and many more. So right before I let Mike take over and walk us through SEO for marketplaces, I do want to mention once again that these are about 20 to 25-minute presentations followed by the group Q&A that we have after. So if you do have any questions, you can just post them in the Zoom chat. Then also be sure to turn on your camera and use the Zoom raise hand functionality so that way I know to call on you during the Q&A. So with that said, thanks again for joining us here today, Mike. So this is a real treat. And I'll just let you take it over from here.
No, absolute pleasure to be here. I'll give you guys a quick overview. What I thought I would do is, before getting into the technical and the really in-depth sort of SEO stuff, I wanted to take today to kind of take a step back and go, okay, what would we do as Portal Ventures if we were to start a marketplace today? We'll have a look at some of the big mistakes that we've seen coming across from the big marketplaces that we work with, and then where we see the opportunity. And hopefully, it should raise enough questions for us to get an idea of, what are the typical points in your SEO journey that marketplaces struggle with so that we can plan out further help for you guys. So first of all, I guess, who the hell am I? I've been in the SEO industry for about 17 years now. That photo, I looked a lot younger than I am now. I founded Portal Ventures about 5 years ago after about 10 years in agency land. And I decided this marketplace concept is booming. Back then, marketplaces were Craigslist, Yellow Pages, and the likes. Slowly transitioned into e-commerce. I worked with some of the earliest e-commerce businesses here in Australia. And now we work across classified service-based marketplaces, e-commerce marketplaces, and sort of some B2B marketplaces on an advisory role. The way that we're a little bit different is, you've all talked to SEO agencies, I'm sure. We're a little bit different in that, we're like a normal agency where we do fee for service, but we've always done it on a performance basis, which has now allowed us to sort of invest back into some of the marketplaces that we work with. So you can kind of call us a mini or hybrid agency consultancy. And then I do a lot of strategic advisory work in my spare time with a number of accelerators here in Australia. So a quick overview of what I wanted to talk about today. First of all, why are we only talking about Google? It's pretty obvious, but Google is obviously the biggest search engine in the world. And I do understand that there's people in other countries where there might be more prevalent search engines like Baidu, Yandex. But at the end of the day, for the biggest scope of marketplaces, we still rely very much on Google. Then what I do is I'd go through our mindset of how we think about approaching a new marketplace. We often get approached by people that say, hey, I've got this great idea. And we step them sort of through this framework to kind of go, how viable would SEO be as a channel? We'll step through some of the things where sort of the big marketplaces go wrong. And, over auditing about 200 websites and marketplaces over the last couple of years, there's a few standouts. And why, lastly, we are so excited about marketplaces and their potential. So again, like I said, why are we only talking about Google? So it's estimated that Google processes approximately 63,000 searches every second, which is about 5.6 billion searches per day and approximately 2 trillion global searches per year. So you can imagine that's quite a bit of information, right? So if we take a step back to the early days of Google, Google realized when they had a marginal sort of market share that to compete, they would need to earn our trust because we were the providers of their content. And without us, guess what? No Google, right? So we gave them our data and they gave us visitors. And that was a pretty sweet deal. Or was it? Looking at 2022 now, this is, I believe, Q2 numbers. Google has now got roughly 93% market share through its various properties. So that includes YouTube, that includes image and Google Maps, etc. 95% of searches globally still happen on any of Google's properties. So what Google has now done is kind of gone and done a bit of a backflip, right? So they're realizing that, hey, the power dynamic has changed. So we're now going to send out less and less traffic over time, and effectively going to make you pay for it, right? If you want to show up, there's AdWords, there's AdSense, Google Shopping, etc. And so for people like myself who are in the SEO industry, the trend from 2004, I should say, to now, there's never been a higher demand for SEO. What we've effectively seen is COVID was the first sort of, I guess the first period where marketplaces got kind of caught with their pants down. They had to reduce their marketing spends, and then pretty much it uncovered how reliable they were on organic search, and in some cases how much they've missed the boat. And now in the turbulent times that we're seeing now, it's kind of like that second wave. The ones that didn't quite want to take that step into SEO are now going, oh crap, we missed a boat. Now we're going to have to do it again. So that trend will start to continue for at least the next 12 months. So the best way to explain the process that we go through in our mind, and this is it's almost like a basic way to think about SEO, but it's the best way to explain it for potentially someone that hasn't gone down this journey before, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to start a marketplace in the very lucrative electrician marketplace space, and we're going to call it Electrician Co. And first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to completely understand what our customer is searching for. And when I say that, there's various tools out there that will help us understand, well, what are people typing in when they're looking for my service, my product? And there's tools like SEMrush, Ahrefs, also Asked, Answer the Public, that will give you a good understanding of what people are searching for. So you particularly want to pay attention to sort of commercial intent queries, like I need an emergency electrician, I want an electrician in Seattle, I want an electrician in Miami. But then we also want to include permutations, for example, location, sizing, time, speciality. We want to include things like what, why, wow, when, where, because people will ask relatively stupid questions for someone that's probably an electrician. But we really just want to get a complete scope of what are the queries for services, what are the questions people are asking, and what content can we produce as a marketplace that's going to allow us to basically blanket cover the electrician topic as a whole. So from the research then you've hopefully kind of completed now, you should have a really good understanding of your market. Obviously, you're an electrician, but you're also now knowing what are the specialities, what are the things they can do, can't do. And what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and segment those keywords together, right? So we're going to segment them by what are the queries that we can answer by virtue of our marketplace. So how can, if person A comes to our marketplace with a problem, will them transacting or engaging with our marketplace solution result in a solution for them? For example, if I'm looking for an emergency electrician in Beverly Hills, can I introduce someone to someone on my platform and thereby solve their problem? If we can, then you've got a really good dynamic. And I won't go into supply demand side or anything like that. That's been covered plenty of times before. Like I said, this is just an example of how we think about it. We then do take a little bit of a step back and go, okay, we kind of realize what queries we can answer, what we can't answer. And for all the other content that's out there, what content can we produce with the remaining questions that don't necessarily have this, transactional intent? And I think there was a few questions earlier on, is, what if someone asks, do I need an electrician to install a ceiling fan? Which, surprisingly gets thousands of searches a month. So while the answer might be best answered in an article, there is actually an opportunity to bring someone back to your marketplace with an appropriate call to action, right? So we might say, hey, in the state of California, you actually need a licensed electrician to be able to install a ceiling fan. By the way, here is our a top 10 recommended electricians in your area that can help you install a ceiling fan. What we're going to look at next is how then we would hypothetically structure our website. So what are the levels of a website, right? So homepage is obviously going to be your most important page. It's what introduces your marketplace, but it's also the most powerful page in terms of linking from the homepage to a subsection or a sub-level within your website. So if we think about it in the electrician scope, it's, well, homepage, it's an electrician marketplace. The level one might be, all of the electricians that we have in specific locations. Electricians, New York, all the way to California. And we're going to create pages and put that into a spreadsheet so that we can cover all the locations where we have supply. Then what we might do is we might subdivide that category of electricians by specialty, right? We've got residential, we've got commercial, we've got specialist, we've got refrigeration, we've got solar. And then level three will be a combination of who do we have in California or in LA that is an electrician in Beverly Hills that specializes in solar installations or solar repairs, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can work your way down just by identifying what services that electrician provides, in what location, in what timing. So, you could get to level 4 where emergency, very high intent. I need an emergency electrician in Santa Monica that can install a solar panel, right? So once you start really understanding the number of levels you can go down to, it starts to become really clear as to how you're going to structure that website. And then once you've kind of figured out the right URL structure, it's now important to understand how do we mash this all together, right? The biggest leverage that a marketplace has is thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions of pages that should all be supporting each other. So if we look at this example that we've got here, we've got electricians. Our next level down is, like we discussed, are our locations, which is typically electricians near me, electricians Seattle, New York, Los Angeles. Then what we do is we sub-cluster underneath. So of all the electricians in Seattle, now we should also create a page for all the emergency electricians in Seattle, because they're going to be our high value tickets, right? Because they higher call out fees, etc. Then we're going to have our solar electricians. Then we're going to have our refrigeration electricians in Seattle. And as you build out a cluster for one location, you start thinking about building out that cluster for all your other locations, right? So what we want to make sure is that Seattle would always link out to all the subclusters within the Seattle pod, if you want to call it that. And all those pages like the emergency, solar, etc., would link back up to the Seattle page. There's no use, and we see this quite often in marketplaces where they try and be a little bit creative and go, well, an emergency electrician in Seattle is relevant to an emergency electrician in LA. And whilst from a Google's perspective, it kind of makes sense, right? They're both emergency electricians. If I'm a user in Seattle, I have absolutely no interest in who's an emergency electrician in LA, because they're not going to help me, right? So don't do that. Make sure that it's relevant, from a user's perspective first, before you think about Google's perspective. Now, moving down, obviously what's going to happen is we're going to start creating hundreds of thousands of pages, depending on how many locations you have supply in. And the best way to sort of look at it now is we're going to go down to the search result page level. So that is emergency electricians in Seattle, right? That page is going to look very similar to electricians in Seattle, right? Because the same electricians might end up on both pages, because A is a subset of B. So what we're going to do is we want to make sure that we really cover the on-page SEO elements that are going to make this page unique compared to, the parent page or the Seattle page. So we're going to update the title tags that are going to be relevant with the location and the call to action, perhaps. We're going to have a separate meta description that's calling out that they're emergency electricians as opposed to just electricians. Heading tags, we apply appropriate schema markup for local businesses, image optimization, and then we start thinking about what unique content can we produce on this page that's going to make this page stand out. So think about, you have a platform of all these listings. It wouldn't be very hard to say, hey, here at Electrician Co, we've got 500 solar panel electricians in Seattle. The average cost of a job is between X and Y. The average installation time of a solar panel is between 1 hour to 3 hours. Think about all the attributes and all the data you have in your system to start auto-creating some of this content. It's not going to get you ranked for, Electricians New York. But once you get down into the deeper levels, where there is less and less competitions in the search results, that little snippet is sometimes enough to cover 100,000 locations. And while there only might be small volumes, those are going to add up much quicker than aiming for Electricians New York, Electricians Seattle, right? And once we now understand, we've built out our hypothetical URL structure, we've built out our site, we know what we need to create on these search result pages, so they're not just the last 5 listings. We're left with this whole bucket from our keyword research that we're not using yet, right? So Marketplace is set up, pages are spun up, that's doing its little thing. Now let's look at how can we actually start promoting this marketplace really in a really accelerated way. And the best way that we've come across, and I just realized one of my paragraphs got cut off there, but I'll speak to that. Any of the queries that we're not using on the marketplace side of the platform, such as the who, what, why, where, we can now start to sort producing content and much more relevant, frequently asked questions. So these articles will basically ensure that even though we're an electrician marketplace, we still want Google and our users to see us as the trusted resource for anything electrical. So this is where we're going to answer, hey, can I install my own ceiling fan? Can I install my own electrical sockets? What do I need to install this? And even on the supply side, we can go, what qualifications do I need to be an electrician in LA, in New York, in whatever state level, right? There is a lot of content that a lot of people go, well, that's not going to drive conversions for me. But here's the trick. What people don't really realize is that once you start producing this type of content, you can now start producing your offsite strategy, right? So if you're producing a guide on how to become an electrician in LA, guess what? There is journalists, there is people, there's websites that will link to you as a resource, and you can actually actively reach out to them and say, hey, we've actually written a guide on how you can become an electrician in LA. Or, hey, if you can install your own your own ceiling fan, and you don't need a qualified provider, this is how you can do it. We'll write an entire guide for you. And even simple things like doing a survey, the weirdest questions will work. So you could do a survey on SurveyMonkey and say, who's ever tried to install their own ceiling fans? How many people of that got electrocuted? How many people then called an electrician, right? Journalists will pick this up. And we've done this with various industries. But what tends to happen now is you're getting these websites linking to these articles, and you're going, great, but the articles aren't bringing my transactions, right? So what we're saying is, but because we're answering the questions and then funneling the user and linking to the internal pages on our marketplace, what happens is the authority from the inbound link goes to our article and then gets siphoned to our marketplace. Because when Google looks at your overall website, they're not just going to look at what page has the most links. It looks at how many domains as a whole are linking to that marketplace or that website, and how do we give that a value of trust. Sure, there is measurements on a page level, but technically what you want to do is, and we've proven this time and time again, where we might have a brand new marketplace that we've spun up to compete with an existing client, just to prove this point, in saying that if we produce a piece of article or a piece of content on a brand new website, it might take us a month or 6 weeks to get indexed and start seeing some rankings. Whereas, for example, on Fresha, if we roll out a new piece of content or a new city, typically it ranks overnight. Why? Their domain authority is about 86. The new site domain authority might be 0 or 1, right? So there is definitely a correlation between the trust that Google has in a website that has a high, domain authority score, even though it's a made-up metric, compared to a brand new website. So when we start considering that, that's kind of how we look at how viable is it to actually, for us as an agency or for us as a supplier, to help you get results in the marketplace. If that marketplace doesn't tick any of these boxes, or one of these boxes is something that we can't do, for example, we had to turn down a client that was selling and buying chemical waste. I guess what, supply side's pretty hard, and it's not really exciting to get people buying chemicals online or chemical waste. We just said, look, there's no way for us to scale this in the way we know how, because it's such a limited market. But interestingly enough, in the past 2 years, we've added it up. It's actually closer to 120 sort of marketplaces that we've reviewed, all the way from classifieds in real estate, automotive, jobs, all the way to e-commerce. In Australia, we've got the Kogan, the Catches, and the likes. So the most common obstacles that actually have a big impact on driving traffic for, let's call them scale up and mature marketplaces, is this good old one here. There is actually no SEO resource, or hey, we've got my cousin who gives us some advice on title tags, and that's just not going to cut it, right? The biggest mistake is not going through the process that we've just gone through, having a marketplace that's working, and then realizing, oh crap, we need to now refactor certain parts. We need to rethink URL structures because we hadn't considered this right from the start. And God bless them, it's why we're in business, right? But also, it's super important that you don't go out there and build custom marketplace solutions when you're at the MVP stage, because that's usually where a startup will burn the most money. Moving on to the second thing that we often see is, people like to boast about their marketplace and saying, hey, we've got 20 million pages indexed, or 20 million pages on our website. How can you work with so many pages? We typically tend to bring up Google Search Console, and there's a little tab there that says index coverage. And the latest one that we've looked at this month was actually it's a real estate client. And I said to them, well, great, you have 16 million pages indexed. Bravo. But, let's go back. We look at two metrics here, right? We look at this little number here that says excluded. So all these, this gray bars that you see here are pages that Google has seen on your website and is aware of, but for one way or another has not indexed them or made them public in the index. So when you tell someone, or when you look at your marketplace and you go, wow, we've got 60 million pages, but hang on, only 330,000 of those are actually in Google's index, you got to ask yourself a question, right? Why is Google ignoring more than 96% of my website? Because that's what it's doing. And when you combine this together, all that Google sees is nearly 17 million pages, but it's going to spend its majority of time on the 15.9 million, right? Because you can imagine, if you've got a block of resources, Google is going to keep crawling these pages to see if something has changed so that it can include it in the index. But if nothing changes, majority of Google's time is going to be spent on pages that will never, ever make it in the Google index. And we've done cleanup exercises where literally we said, look, we love doing performance-based SEO, we call it, right? We like to back our experience. Just by cleaning this up, we've seen 20 to 30% increases in organic traffic because Google is now focusing purely on the pages that are adding value. So that was a very, very easy exercise for us. And that's just the start. That is just the first thing we look at. The second thing we look at is coming back to the concept of making sure that your pages link out to relevant pages and subclusters within your pods or in your clusters. Because what you're missing out on is if, for example, the homepage didn't link to my Seattle page, all of a sudden it also doesn't link out to my subclusters in that Seattle page. And what ends up happening is you can end up with things like they're called orphan pages, or pages that exist within your website, but your website doesn't actually link to. So it might be sitting out here in the ether, and you're thinking, well, this is a page that we should delete because it never gets any traffic. Maybe there is a consideration that nothing is actually linking to it, or Google hasn't found a link to it. And a simple way to actually clean this up is just to install a breadcrumb navigation system, right? A breadcrumb that, you see your home, category, and then the page that you're on. That is by far the easiest way to ensure you'll never have any orphan pages. It's not going to pass a lot of Google value. This is where you get the link list that's usually sit down in the footer or just before the footer. But you want to make sure that all of the pages that you think are going to drive value for your marketplace are linked to from somewhere. And we find this every day still. And then we get the old, usually the big guys, right? So in Australia, you've got the REAs and the domains of we don't need content on our pages. Everyone knows us. We're just going to show you 10 products or 10 real estate listings, right? I did this presentation in Madrid and Zoopla was in the room, and I put them up against some of their competitors. And afterwards, they were very keen to chat about why they weren't ranking for those pages. And it's simply no longer enough to have the yellow pages mentality of just showing 10 listings. We need to be able to show unique content that talks about the listings that you have. Like I shared earlier, we have this amount of electricians in this location. These are available between Monday and Friday. These are available between Sunday. This is all information that you already have about your suppliers. And even further so, if you're working with established businesses and not like in a peer-to-peer marketplace, you actually might want to rank for that provider name. You might want to rank for Bob's Electrician, John's Electrician, because guess what? If you become the authority that you think you're going to become, you will outrank your suppliers, whether they like it or not, and you will become a source for Google to reference reviews. AutoGuru, a mechanic marketplace here in Australia, started with nothing. Now they're outranking most of their actual suppliers. And Google said, hey, in the Google Little Map listing, it says, hey, they've got 4 out of 5 reviews on Facebook. And this Bob's Electrician has got 5 out of 5 stars on AutoGuru. So AutoGuru is now a trusted resource for Google as a reference point. And then understandably, probably the absolute biggest gripe that we see is the number of low quality link building, quote unquote, providers, right? We've all seen them. Hi, dear madam, sir. I can build you high quality guest posts on my database of 10,000 websites, and they'll share with you a Google Doc. And guess what? That Google Doc is public because they're mailing it out to 10,000 people. So when you go to Google and type in that URL, guess who else knows about that list of backlinks? Google, right? So it's very easy for Google to just go disavow, you're not going to get any value from these links. So first of all, we get marketplaces that either heavily invest into link acquisition, and I'll get to some strategies in a second, or we get to ones that go, we don't want to do anything, we don't want to touch it, but not doing link acquisition is a surefire way of not accelerating your growth. However, investing in link acquisition can be risky, but it is a surefire way to actually accelerate your growth. And there's various strategies, and I think you could probably have an entire session on link building just by itself. But just be mindful. If someone emails you out of the blue asking money for links, or go to a link broker website, be mindful that they might tell you that they're doing outreach on behalf of you. If they can guarantee you a set number of links per month, that is not organic. That is manipulated, and it will not add much value to your business at all. It'll just hurt you in the pocket. But why we're so keen and why I got really excited about marketplaces is the concept of long tail search. So a long tail search is an often longer and more specific query, one that gets less searches per month, but with its intent, it actually means that it's very likely to convert, or at least higher intent of conversion than some of the top tier keywords. So if you have a look, the search demand curve looks something like this. And because we're working with PowerPoint, it's hard to see, but that red line, that red part here keeps going forever, right? And it's bidimensional. Search volume, high search volume, real estate, New York. Yes, I would love to rank #1 for that. It gets a million searches globally, or 100 million searches. But guess what? For me to achieve that versus the revenue I'm going to create from that keyword, there's a disconnect, right? It's super hard, and there is absolutely no intent. So when we look at our electrician example, electricians as a keyword, great. I don't know who types in electricians into Google. I don't know what you want, information, data, right? Electricians in San Francisco, it's obviously going to have a little bit less search volume, but now we can sort of understand the intent a little bit more, right? We know that you're looking for electricians in San Francisco, easy. Now, where it gets to the long tail, it's I need an emergency solar panel electrician in Miami. That's the sweet spot. Give me all of the locations in the United States and make me #1 for this, and I'll let you have these ones, right? Because I'm going to derive much more revenue and bottom line revenue from these queries than you will from those queries. And therefore, when we start marketplaces, people go, well, how quickly can we rank for, XYZ Melbourne or New York? You'll go, no, hang on a second. You've got incumbents in your market, because virtually everything is a marketplace these days. There's marketplaces for everything. Let's start with the quick wins. Build the quick wins, and a surefire way to kind of under the radar start building your defensive moat. And that slowly will help you rank for electricians San Francisco, and it will help you rank for electricians. That's why we're excited about marketplaces and its potential. And I'm sure there's going to be a ton of questions, so I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, that was such a great presentation, Mike. So thanks for walking us through it. So
no problems.
I have a lot of questions myself, but I'll let some of the founders come on here on the chat first. Hey,
yeah, absolutely.
Hey, John, did you want to jump on?
One of the questions, and I posted it in the chat, and I apologize for jumping ahead there, Mike. The concept of you were building the site, effectively the sitemap or site structure, URL structure, via looking at what the search kind of key search topics are, like electricians or electricians in Miami or electricians that do, right? And so you're kind of building that hierarchy and separately. Are you actually embedding that hierarchy in the URL structure as part of the SEO model? So it's like electricians.com/Miami/solar power, that kind of thing. Is it being done in the URL, or is it being done otherwise? Like, so is it important when I get eventually down to, Yurumi's electricians, right, that it's actually electricians, Seattle, solar power, Yurumi? Is it something like that?
No, it used to be, yes, right? It used to, the old school thinking used to be everything has a subdirectory. Now, what we found is that actually the longer the URL gets, the less sort of, I don't want to say the less value, but it becomes really hard to control, right? Because you could end up with 10 subdirectories. So what we tend to do is we go, okay, if we're just in electricians, so if we were Thumbtack, it'd be a different story. But if we're focusing on one niche, what we would do is have domain.com/location, right? Because that'll typically be the most searched for. But what we then might do is, rather than going Miami / solar panel electricians, we might just call it solar panel electricians -Miami as that subdirectory, right? Simply because it always ensures that there's one level deep. When you're working with your suppliers, there is absolutely no need to have the supplier in the URL, because what will end up happening is Rumi's electrician might supply North Beach, South Beach, Middle Beach, Miami. But what then ends up happening is, if you've got pages for North, Middle, and South Beach, Miami, you're going to have 3 duplicates of your Rumi's electricians. So what you might have is electricians.com/suppliers/Rumi's, and the URLs for the location specialities just reference that one provider URL, so that you're not consistently duplicating the supplier.
That seems like there's a lot of complication there. That's actually kind of constructing that the right way. That's seems like a lot of art that you got to get into there. Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Awesome. That was a great question. URL structure. Hey, Richard, do you want to jump on?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And really enjoyed the presentation, Mike. It's fantastic. It's full of valuable insights. Really grateful and very timely, as well as our team is just really knee deep right now in re-envisioning how we're approaching SEO, what we're doing. I have lots of questions, but I'll just stick to one and then kind of go from there. You talked about the sort of the low quality link building and encouraged us to think about, well, do higher quality, invest more in that link building. And that's something we're actively, putting together a strategy right now. But I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to that. What does a high quality link building strategy look like?
Sure, absolutely. So let me go back and go, how do we explain SEO to people? It's like you're either renting an apartment or you're building your house. And every time you make a mortgage payment, you're actually appreciating your asset, right? Whereas if you're renting, you're making someone else rich, which is, in this case, Google. When we look at link building, we're looking at it the same way. So if you as a person get looked at and they say you become the best of the 5 people that you hang around with, right? So if you start hanging out with undesirables, you're going to end up an undesirable. If you associate yourself with people that are respected, that are trustworthy, you're going to be seen as respectable and trustworthy. So when we look at link building, we look at it much like networking events. Who should I network with? Because I might not get a link today, but one day down the line, I might have a piece of content that journalist or that you might want to publish about me. So the very, very first thing is just connect with other marketplace owners, connect with associations if there is any in your in the specific niche that you're in. Then second of all, what tends to work really well right now is it's either like very long form content on a specific topic and reaching out to other businesses that might want to reference that as a source, right? So I'll give you an example. We wrote a guide on how to prepare your e-commerce business for sale. And guess what? It's a very comprehensive guide. I think it was like 12,000 words. And then what we simply did was we reached out to the big commerce, the Shopify's out there, and said, hey, we're writing a guide to help people sell their e-commerce business. And we want to make sure that you're referenced and that, here's our percentages of Shopify businesses that get sold compared to, WooCommerce businesses. You should probably link to this reference because it's a good notion for you. And that works, right? We've done that. The second thing is you create relationships with business owners. So what worked really well for us is we network with a lot of journalists that cover, the tech space, the marketplace space. We also basically network with other businesses like SaaS businesses, e-commerce businesses, because guess what? you're not the only one that's got link building problems, right? So if I can help the SEO manager at American Express hit their link target by giving them a link from one of my other clients, in return, they're going to repay that favor when they write an article on my marketplace or my industry, and I go, hey, would you mind just like dropping that reference to my website in there, right? Because there is SEOs all around the world, they're all in-house, and they've all got KPIs to hit. So why are we ignoring them? Let's help each other out. It's not really that hard. And then the last that works really well for us is, it's always worked really well, is a survey monkey survey, right? Get a survey, ask 10 questions, ask 2,000 people, and create some incredible insights. A friend of mine did one on what driving schools had the best pass rate on the first go. And they basically went to the public database, got all the driving schools, got the percentages of the driving schools that had people pass on the first go, put that into a story, and just reached out to all the journalists that wrote about driving schools, driving qualifications, or newspapers in the area. And guess what? It worked. Another one they did was they put all the royals around the world into a big list, and then put a list of what their highest university degrees or PhDs were. And they made a table of the most educated royals in the world as an infographic. Guess what? It's super stupid. And I know no one cares about it, but the client got 60, 70 links from it, from high, Vanity Fair, LA Weekly type magazines, because guess what? Journalists need something clickbaity to publish. And that's just the world we live in.
And Mike, to close the loop on that question, and our strategy sounds very similar to what you've described, or rather we're hiring for someone to do that. What is the job description of the person who takes ownership? I mean, we've called it public relations hacker, but how do you hire for someone who takes ownership of that role?
To be quite honest, the best results that we've seen, because we actually help marketplaces hire these, right? Because we don't want to be doing this work. We want to give them the standard operating procedures ultimately to help them, is you want to find someone with like a writing or a creative background and just put them to the test. If I gave you this set of data, create a story out of that. I'll pay you for your time. That's great. But we might interview 20 people. And you're going to get some back that'll simply go, here's an infographic and here's the answers. Or you might get someone that actually creates a compelling story. Like, the stuff that we all go through on Facebook and go, oh, that's actually pretty interesting. What kind of potato am I? Right? It's silly, but it works. People can take data and interpret it different ways. And you're just not going to know unless you just test out 10 or 20 of them and just get the best out of them. Plus, it's cheaper than a recruiter.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate the insights.
No problems.
Those are some good questions. Hey, Morris, do you want to come on?
Yeah, thanks. So I have a question. Thanks for your time. This has been great. So we have a marketing site at our domain with Webflow that's like based on the architecture you talked about. So like city and location or services. My question is, we also have an app at a subdomain, and we have like thousands of URLs for like each worker and each job, and they're like pretty similar, but not exactly. So there might be like good keywords in there, but at the same time, it's like tens of thousands of pages that are pretty similar. And then a separate one is like the workers we have, like it's actual individuals and not businesses. And how do you think about like, if we're going to try to like use their full name or like part of their name, and how to go about doing that? Like, should we get permission or just not even do it? So yeah, that's my question.
Sure. So let me just reiterate, there's probably 2 or 3 questions in there, right? So first of all, you've got your marketing site, which is the location. Then you said you'd had a subdomain, which actually contained the jobs and the people, right? So first of all, a subdomain is actually seen as a different entity to the main domain. So if you've got domain.com, it'll be its own entity versus, app.domain.com. So keep in mind that there's 2 distinct different websites there, and Google will consider them 2 different websites. And And the reason for that is simply, you look at blogger.com, right? It was Rumi at blogger.com, Mike at blogger.com. If all of us basically were the same website and I started publishing crap content, then it would affect my main domain. So the question now becomes, do you want to publish the jobs and people, kind of like the work that's done at Upwork, where you want to create all the permutations of different jobs, categories, subcategories, etc. And then how do you want to index, I guess, the people? There's questions around, do you want to make that data available? A lot of these job sites will go, it's Mike V, right? Because otherwise, guess what? I'm just going to look up your name, hit you up on LinkedIn and avoid any cost to the platform. Second of all, the jobs will become very similar, but really you don't need to index the individual jobs, because it's not the job itself that generates the traffic. It's the category that the job or the category that the business belongs to that generates the traffic.
Yeah, thanks. That's useful. I think some of our jobs have kind of those long tail keywords in it, which, might be interesting. Also, I guess another follow-up is can I make that subdomain forward from the domain and somehow get value out of that from the original, or they're just different?
No, so look, there's various ways you can go about it. I probably would need to know a little bit more about the situation, but for example, you could do what they call a reverse proxy from subdomain to subfolder, which is you're basically porting a subdomain at Cloudflare or whatever content delivery network you have. And so Google reads it as domain.com/whatever instead of the whatever.domain.com. And a lot of marketplaces do this with their blogs. They've got a marketplace infrastructure built and they go, oh crap, we forgot to blog. So let's just spin up a WordPress and put that on the subfolder.
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem.
That's been asked a few times in the community, so I'm glad we got to touch on it. So
I can actually, I'll see if I can find some links. There've been studies around this.
Yeah, awesome. That'd be great. So, hey, Olivia, do you want to come on?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. Thanks so much, Mike. This is super informative. Really great presentation. You spoke a little bit about long tail search. And so my question was around, is there an optimum number of words that we should be looking at? Your example showed 4 words. So, from your experience, is there an optimal number that we should be looking at to kind of model how we base our long tail search on?
Good question. Short answer, no. Long answer, what you want to be looking for is going through site search data is invaluable. So if you're an e-commerce store, people might be looking for Jordan Air Max, I don't know, I'm not a sneaker junkie, but whatever, size 17 in black. It could be 12 words. The second is Search Console will tell you a lot about a page. So you can zoom in on a particular page and for the last 16 months, look at all the queries that have been performed by people that landed on that particular page, and you'll grab a lot of long tail potential queries out of that. And second of all, go into your keyword tools and look at everything that says 0, right? Because what happens is, I think that they did a study on 9 billion search queries, and 92% of those had 10 or less searches. And 10 searches is kind of the threshold for these tools to start reporting numbers, because if something like today we were to get COVID-20, God forbid, that query has got no historical value. So all the tools are going to tell you, no, don't worry about it. No one's searching for COVID-20, when in actual fact, it is trending right now. So all the queries that you're getting as 0, we've seen some being reported by Google as there is no search volume. But we looked at the last 6 months and it actually generated 17,000 clicks and generated a substantial amount of revenue. And it kind of comes down to a bit of a sanity check too, right? If it's this really obscure long tail query that, you kind of get a gut feel like this is just dumb, then just don't do it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
No worries.
Hey, is it Pokin? Hopefully I'm pronouncing it right. Sorry about that.
It is. Thank you. Hello. I had a question around search star ratings in the search results snippets. I've seen that in different review sites, and I was curious, like, how important is it to have the star rating? And then is it possible to still have that kind of result show without a 5-star system? Like, say you had a 90 out of 100, what would be a way to still have that considered by Google?
Sure. So there's a couple of ways that you can do it at a business level. So if you've got business suppliers, they can have their own rating. And that might show up when I put in, Yo Roomy's electrician, and that might have its own little star rating in the Google SERPs. When you're talking about search results pages, so I might look at electricians in San Francisco. What you'll want to do is you'll want to aggregate the number of listings you have, aggregate the average star rating. Unfortunately, Google just does it on a 0 to 5. So if you're doing a 0 to 100, just divide it by 10. And then just publish that number in schema markup, and it will generally start showing up in the search results. And in the search results, we've seen variance of click-through rates anywhere between a couple of percent to 20-25% extra click-through rate just by having stars or frequently asked questions in the search result page. It's no longer the case that you rank number 1 for a query and therefore you get the most traffic. We often get more traffic than competitors in position 3 because we've got more optimized title tags, meta descriptions, and rich markup. And we know that because they're both owned by the same entity.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
It looks like Richard, did you have another question want to come back on?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Question number 2. One of the things I've found out quite frustrating about SEO is that, we're told, hey, it's a long thing. You don't see results overnight. So we bring someone on, we interview a bunch of people. We find the guy we think's right for the job. And then, 3 months in, we're not seeing any progress, no changes in, organic traffic or where we're ranking. And then by the time you get to 6 months, you're like, okay, is this the right person for the job? And sort of by the time you're like, you're sort of a year in by the time you realize maybe you haven't got the right person because you've given them time because you've told that because that SEO is like a long thing. So I guess, my question is, how do we determine the progress of someone who we've brought in for SEO? Like, what are some timelines? So, at 3 months, we want to see this, at 6 months. So how do we track the progress of our SEO hire essentially? And when is it time to pull the plug versus give them another 6 months?
Sure. So I'll just kind of break that down, right? So there have been multiple studies that will say, if you've got a brand new website, it will take 6 to 12 months at least to see some impact, whether it's to get to 5,000 visits or something, right? So unfortunately, it is like renting where you move into a turnkey solution versus, hey, we still got to lay the foundation. We still got to put the bricks down and paint the walls, right? So we might say, okay, we're going to produce X amount of content. We're going to optimize these pages. And what we might want to set some micro KPIs. So it's not as black and white as saying, well, why aren't we at 10,000 visits when we were at 5,000 last month? It's what are the incremental changes that we're making? And is that moving us in the right direction? And typically the foundational piece is the most important, right? Because if you've got a good strategy, and this is where we are a little bit different, is we put the strategy in place and then we get the team involved to eventually take it over from us. Because once you've got a good strategy in place, you don't really need an SEO guy, right? What it ends up becoming is you want a smart CTO or a smart dev that's advocating for the fact that SEO actually works. It's not just one of those things that you got to bribe them with bottles of whiskey to implement your tickets, right? Get your dev in your side and then get creative content writers and UX. Because those two things, the product side and the development side, will simultaneously work together if you've got the right SEO strategy in play. And what we find is that if you can show a dev even an inkling of increase in traffic, they get excited. Now, you get a product person that makes tweaks on the website that's going to drive more traffic and conversions. Guess what? Now you've got a happy product manager, a happy developer, and you just need someone that oversees the overall strategy. So this concept of an SEO guy is really, I say it, but it's almost mute. It's get the right strategy, work with someone in SEO that can help you with a strategy, or someone that's done it before, but then quickly realize, how long do we need this guy for? And how can we train people that are specialists in the concept of what he wants to do, but the actually implementation of it, you want a specialist. And the sooner you can kind of put those pieces to the puzzle together, you can flip the SEO guy after 6 months, right? Because SEO as a concept is pretty much dead. It's strategy. The SEO guys can help you put the team together, but more holistically, the SEO guy should be your T-shaped marketer. They're across product, they're across data, they're across development, and make sure that we keep the team happy, right? So if you can get to that stage, I think you'll have much better experience.
Good. It's really good to hear that, because we're certainly moving in that direction and are moving away from the quote SEO guy and making it more of a product content strategy. So it's good to hear that reinforced. Appreciate it.
And what we do is, every now and then just get an SEO guy in and go, hey, give us a once over. And this is what we do with our own work. So we'll work with a client for 6 months, and we'll get a specialist, an SEO person that specializes in content, and go, hey, we'll hire you for half a day, poke holes in what we've put together. Or, like you would with an accountant. You don't need an accountant on staff every day, but you're going to pull them in once a month to go, hey, how's my business doing, right? You just want to pull in specialists when you need them.
Yeah, makes sense.
Do we have hey, Mike, do we have time for one more question? If we can,
absolutely. I've got plenty of time.
Awesome. Hey, John, do you want to come back on?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. This stuff is gold. I'm loving this. I had a question. I have 3 questions. I'm going to ask one, but if we have time, I'll ask the follow-ups.
Sure.
So the first one is sites like G2 Crowd and others that basically encourage people to put their badges with their nice ratings on their website. So I'm G2 rated 4.8, 375 reviews, right? That do those badges do anything for your SEO?
No, I think TripAdvisor kind of ruined that party for us. I can't categorically say it's got no value, but Google has got it written in their guidelines that links embedded in widgets are against Google Webmaster Guidelines, so you can get dinged for it. TripAdvisor used to be really clever, where they embedded your widget, but then in the source code would have your link. So your link didn't actually show, but the source code showed the link, and that was enough for them to get a lot of traction really quickly. I wouldn't rely on it.
This would be like even if it wasn't a widget, if it was just like a JPEG with that had a link and open up another page. That's bad. That wouldn't do it.
I wouldn't do it if the sole purpose was SEO benefits. If it was to get recognition as a review platform for your industry, then as a brand building exercise, absolutely. And then if it brings in any SEO value, it's a bonus.
Can I ask a follow on? Yeah. Thanks. Have you seen any use of what I'll call a adjacent multi-marketplace strategy? I just made that term up. But the whole concept of closely related marketplaces that are independent but highly related to each other, that link to each other, right? So an example might be maybe it's sporting goods for kids' youth sports, and I'll say baseball, soccer, lacrosse, right? 3 different marketplaces really focused on those very specific sport things, but they kind of link to each other, or they relate to each other. Have you seen anything like that? Does that have any value as independent marketplaces with their own entities, but they're linking to each other? And hey, if you're doing this football camp, what do you do in the spring? Are you doing track? Are you doing baseball? Do you want to look at some baseball equipment? Right. I don't know if that helps at all. Is that valuable?
Sure. I guess that comes down to, I'm imagining you're starting out with one and then wanting to bolt on others.
Yes.
But then the question becomes, is your name broad enough so that you can start with football and just add all the other sports into the same marketplace? Because what you'll end up doing is by creating separate entities, you're just multiplying the amount of work you need to do. And the interlinking between all these efforts has got limited capacity, right? A perfect example is the guys like News Corp, for example, that own the big newspapers and then own the big real estate companies, or the real estate portals, the Zillows, right? And so there is only limited amount of value that they can get from pushing articles to their public and then linking to their portal, basically. So that's why a lot of these businesses have spun out the real estate section, right? Because a lot of these real estate portals used to be on the actual media sites. That used to be news.com/real estate, right? But they've now spun them out to be, you know, they've got a lot bigger. And what we're seeing less of is interlinking between them. It's more of a, hey, here's our section, just go straight to the real estate side. But if I were you, and in a startup capacity, I would go, what name can we use so that we can just bolt on all these other sports? It's kind of like, I think WAG is a perfect example. And in Australia, we've got MadPaws. It started with dog walking, right? But now it's like bird sitting and pet sitting and cat sitting. Even though, you know, it started as a dog walking marketplace.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks.
No problem.
This is a good last question to wrap things up with. So thanks for taking the time to join us today. This is super informative. So I learned a lot myself, and I know we all appreciate it here. So, you know, I did, Mike, one question I had for you, though, is there maybe like 2 to 3 examples of marketplaces that, you know, do SEO exceptionally well in the earlier stages that we can look at for reference, maybe?
Yeah, gosh, there's a couple of good examples. You know, when I look at marketplaces that do SEO well right now, gosh, I'd have to think about a couple, because there's a few that have done extremely well in the e-commerce space. I like, you know, the companies like Farfetch and RealReal, for example, who've done it with recycling, where they've had quite a challenge, kind of like Poshmark had, where massive luxury fashion marketplace, but then it's social media driven, right? So you've actually got to sign up for an account to get access to it. And then you've got other marketplaces. Probably my favorite case study, and I'll share the link in like the AMA or whatever, was the case study of a company in Germany called HomeToGo. And they were going to take on Airbnb. And so when you exclude Airbnb as a brand, HomeToGo has actually overtaken Airbnb in Germany, in France, and in the United States for non-branded searches around rental vacations. And they did it in like a 4-year time span.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah, that would probably be my absolute favorite case study. And I will drop a link in the AMA that we've got going of a good example. And someone has actually broken down the entire strategy. So it's really interesting read.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we definitely love to check that out. So
yeah,
sure. Yeah, thanks again. So we definitely covered quite a bit here, and you know, I know we had a lot of really great questions too. So thanks for taking the time to you know, join us and then answer some of the questions. And
no, I appreciate your time and everyone's time here for geeking out on some SEO stuff.
Yeah, well, we'll have to do a you know, follow up to get some of the questions in the community, or maybe a part 2 for the workshop. You know, at some time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to hear any feedback that you guys have, any questions. It will determine whether we can answer them in the community or whether we do like a follow-up session. Absolutely, more than happy to.
Awesome. Sounds amazing. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining in today and the great questions.